Wife caught cheating with two guys. It was a big day for our village when the film crew arrived. Even a fairly low-budget movie that would be filmed for only a few days made a sensation, and since generous fees were offered for the use of various locations, and those willing to work as extras received decent rates, local business experienced a boom. Of course, accommodation was not lacking either. Some of the main participants took rooms in hotels in the nearest town, and two small boarding houses were soon filled. To be honest, the money offered for accommodation didn't interest me. I'm semi-retired in my 50s, with a very healthy bank account, a fair amount of land that developers have tried to buy from me at very generous offers, and shares in several local companies. So I hesitated for a while. Eventually, our representative on the local county council asked if I could find space for a couple of technicians. Not wanting to let the village down, I agreed. After all, we have the biggest house in the village with plenty of spare rooms, so it just wouldn't be fair to disagree. When I say we, I mean me and my wife. Annabelle, my wife, is much younger than I am. In fact, she's not even 30 yet, so I'd better explain it briefly. She was raised by her father, a deeply religious man, after his wife died when she was still an infant. Although she is very intelligent, she was not allowed to be educated because he believed that a woman's place was in the home, cooking and cleaning, so she led a very limited life. When he was dying, he begged me to marry her and look after her, and as I was a widower at the time and needed someone to look after the house, I agreed. Not very romantic, I know. But if you had seen Annabelle at the time, you would have understood me. She was plain, timid, and rather mousy-looking. Even though I gave her everything she needed to buy clothes, cosmetics, and so on, she still dressed so conservatively, and didn't like to use cosmetics, that she sometimes looked much older than her years. After 5 years together, though, I don't think either of us had much to complain about. She was a more than competent housewife, and while the sex was sporadic at best, it didn't bother me much because my desires were rare enough as it was. Added to that was the fact that sex always had to take place in bed, under the covers, with the lights off. She was so discreet that, believe it or not, I still had never once seen her naked. So I wasn't concerned when two young men arrived to temporarily take up residence in our best guest room. The older of the two, Tom, was tall and agile, with a mop of unruly blonde hair, while David was shorter but powerfully built, and his swarthy skin suggested some sort of mixed ancestry. Even when they suggested that there was a potential extra role that would be perfect for Annabelle, I saw no cause for concern. They obviously needed someone for the role of a barmaid, obviously it was a non-speaking role, who would be in the background serving drinks and giving change, and then collecting empty glasses from the tables. I asked Annabelle what she thought about it, but she just shrugged, although I could tell from the look in her eyes that she was actually very interested in the idea, and I said she should do it, earn some extra pin money, and be immortalized on film. I began to realize that things weren't quite what they seemed when, after the first day of filming, I noticed the guys throwing some interesting looks at her when they thought I wasn't looking, and when they left for the second day, both looking a little preoccupied with helping her get into her old beat-up Land Rover and head to the set. I certainly noticed the new hairstyle the filmmakers had given her and had to agree that it improved her looks, but didn't turn her into an incredibly sexy hottie. Nevertheless, with plenty of time to spare, I decided it would be a good idea to see what was going on, and upon arriving at the location, I didn't immediately figure out what was what. The shoot was taking place inside a pub, and I only had to follow the direction of almost all the men's gazes to find my wife. Along with her makeup, the outfit she was wearing, the top was not so much fitted as clinging to life, being tight enough to show off the curve of her breasts and low enough to show off her large cleavage, caused a surprising transformation. Gone was my usual boring Annabelle, and in her place was a sexy, gorgeous, albeit slightly tart woman, who clearly enjoyed having men drool over her. Since I was standing far away from the action, I was sure she couldn't see me, not only because she was absorbed in her occupation, but also because she seemed to be surrounded by admirers in between shots. Later, when they were working on a scene where she moved around tables collecting empty glasses, everyone seemed to be fascinated by her long, slender legs under a very short skirt, legs that are usually hidden by loose pants or long skirts. Watching her, I felt a sense of pride that my wife was attracting so many male gazes. But strangely enough, I was somewhat turned on by the thought that many of the men present were clearly thinking of her in the most general sexual terms. She did indeed look extremely attractive, and eventually it dawned on me that I began to imagine some of them taking her in their arms, kissing her, and then beginning to seduce her. And, what was really strange and incomprehensible, I soon found that the thought gave me a real thrill. This realization came to me when the director, while explaining something he really wanted to get in the shot, put his hand on her waist and, as he started to pull away, let it drop lower for a moment, and Annabelle just smiled and didn't flinch in the slightest. It wasn't a big deal, but my anxiety kicked in, and even more embarrassed than before, I slipped away. I had no idea where to go. The pub was being used for filming, and the tea store was so crowded I knew I wouldn't be served for ages yet, so there weren't many options left. Eventually, after walking around for a bit in the warm sunshine, I decided to head to John Barlow's house. Every Friday night for the past 20-odd years, the four of us had gathered there for a friendly but fiercely competitive game of whist solo, which often stretched well past midnight. No one was home. This puzzled me at first, but then I remembered him saying that he had hoped to get a job as a minibus driver for a movie group. Apparently, he had succeeded, but it didn't help me much because I felt the need for company to take my mind off the increasingly salacious thoughts that my wife might be with other men. All I could find was a long walk back to our house, which I took as dusk turned to darkness. I didn't know if Annabelle was home or not, but as I approached the front door, I saw lights on in the hall and guest room and realized that someone was there. I was overly cautious, but I'm always pretty quiet, and when I entered the living room and found no one there, I was about to turn on the TV to distract myself when I heard voices coming from upstairs. At first it didn't mean anything, but when I realized that one of the voices was a woman's, I froze. Silently as possible, I walked to the foot of the stairs and listened carefully. Without difficulty, I recognized Tom's deep, soft voice, and a few moments later, the lighter voice of David. At that moment, however, there was a sudden explosion of general laughter, and then a woman's voice said with a throaty giggle, "Now that's really very, very naughty." It was my wife. It was Annabelle. There could be no doubt about that. Slowly, barely daring to breathe for fear of being heard, I walked up the stairs and stopped where it turned to the right. Not only could I see straight into the only lighted room, but I was pretty sure I wouldn't be seen in the shadows. And what I saw shocked me so much that I slumped down on the steps before my legs could give out. Annabelle was sitting on the bottom edge of the bed, sandwiched between the guys who were sitting on either side of her, and at that very moment I heard David say, "Well, you can't blame us for feeling this way when your husband is stupid enough to leave you alone with us. What man would prefer a game of cards to the privacy of home with someone like you?" I expected Annabelle to protest, or at least blush, but she did neither and only giggled coquettishly. Even though she wasn't wearing a barmaid outfit, she'd changed into a loose-fitting blouse and knee-length skirt, she still looked incredibly seductive, sexy, and, I suppose, flirtatious. All I had to do to put an end to it was to make the slightest sound. But for some unknown reason, I waited to see what would happen. Though it was hard for me to admit it even to myself, deep down, I knew what I was hoping for. Even as I took my next carefully controlled breath, I saw Annabelle turn to David to say something, and fail to do so when he kissed her on the lips. She feigned shock, of course, but the gleam in her eyes completely belied any protest she might have made. "Go on. You didn't mind that, did you, Anna?" he said, and when she blushed slightly and answered nothing, Tom complained. Oh, I see you're happy enough to have David kiss you. So then, I'm the gooseberry here? And when she turned to answer him, it was no surprise that he took the opportunity to taste her lips. However, unlike his mate, he took the opportunity by wrapping his arm around her, pulling her closer to him and making the kiss much longer. Despite a few quiet words of protest, it was quite obvious that my wife was thoroughly enjoying what was happening and making no serious attempt to stop it. When David reached for her and turned her face toward his for another kiss, she didn't resist at all, and even when Tom reached up and undid the top button of her blouse, her only reaction was heavier breathing. It was perfect teamwork. As soon as David broke the kiss, Tom gently turned her head toward him to kiss her again, much longer, while the younger boy's busy fingers quickly undid the remaining buttons. A moment later, perfectly coordinated in their efforts, the two of them pulled the blouse off her shoulders and placed it on a nearby chair. In between kisses, David, perhaps the more nervous of the two, asked for confirmation that no one would disturb them. Annabelle, breathing heavily, assured him that I didn't return from the card game until after midnight. That was fair enough. But then she added that I was always making noise coming home because the card game was also a drinking party, which was just an outright lie. I tried to figure out what she was up to, but it was too complicated for my confused brain. Plus, of course, I was still in a frenzy trying to figure out why what I was witnessing appealed to me so much. It was obvious that these two men knew exactly what they were doing, but it was also obvious that my wife knew it too, because when David reached for the clasp of her bra, she quite deliberately made a half-turn toward Tom to accept his kiss. It wasn't long before her bra joined her blouse on the chair, and her beautiful, full, firm breasts were exposed not only to the two men, but to me as well. I had never seen more than a glimpse of them before, but now I had time to see how smooth and rounded they were. The sight of her clearly enjoying the opportunity to show herself off to two men was so provocative that I had to keep having to adjust my pants. "Oh my God! You're just gorgeous, Anna," I heard one of them say, almost certainly David, as Tom enthusiastically pressed his mouth against her breasts while his companion caressed and teased her body. I was so dizzy that I almost didn't notice the two men taking turns getting up to remove their shirts and jeans, but I was well aware that they were lifting my wife to her feet and unbuttoning her skirt because, instead of waiting for them to continue, she was gently rocking her hips so that she fell to the floor and then gracefully stepped out of it. Once they lowered her smoothly onto the bed, my wife, Anna, I always used her full name and never thought to abbreviate it, eagerly accepted and often initiated their kisses and clearly enjoyed the feel of the hands she was allowing to roam so freely over her nearly naked body. But as the men disposed of their last garments, it became clear that something very different from what she was used to was in store for her. Next, two guys had sex with my wife while I just watched. She enjoyed it, and it felt really good. Afterward, all three of us hugged, kissed, and giggled like children who had just discovered an exciting new toy. After a while, Tom said, "So, sorry to spoil the party, but we have a long drive ahead of us if we want to get to the new place by morning. I'm going to shower first." He stood up, kissed each of Anna's breasts lovingly, and headed for their bathroom. Moments later, my eyes locked on my wife again as David began having sex with my wife again. I could hardly believe he had managed to come so quickly, but I could hear him trying to pull himself together by teasing, "Do you want it, Anna?" But all efforts were in vain because she only laughed out loud and said, "Don't sulk. You don't have time to waste. If that's what you want, just make love to me." And that's exactly what he did. There were no subtleties, gentle words, or touching. He just started having sex with my wife vigorously and persistently. When after a minute or so he rolled over to lie next to her, I saw my wife's body again. Afterward, Anna said to David, "There's no time. Only if you and Tom are going to get to the next place." He kissed her, and as Tom got out of the shower and began to dress, he hurried to get cleaned up and ready. While my wife lay chatting with Tom and he gathered his things in preparation for leaving, I took the opportunity to climb the remaining stairs and slip silently into our own bedroom. A little while later, I heard the men saying goodbye to us. I heard them, only half-jokingly, trying to persuade Anna to come with them, and then, when she laughingly refused, to come and wave to them at the door. "Yes, of course," she laughed. "Can you imagine what anyone would say if they saw me like that at the door? Anyway, take one last look and memorize what you see, okay?" There was a minute or two of laughing, playing, giggling, and I heard Tom say, "Come on, Anna. You kissed him goodbye and, oh, my goodness, that's very sweet. Remember, you have our numbers. If you ever—" "I know," said my wife. "Bye, Tom. Bye, David." Then I heard them go downstairs and open the front door. A moment later, I heard the click of the cylindrical lock closing behind them, and at the same instant, our room was suddenly flooded with light. I looked up from the bed, not knowing what to say. Standing in the doorway was my wife, unclothed, but there was not the slightest sign of shyness or embarrassment in her eyes, and mischief shone in her eyes. "Well, I take it you enjoyed it?" she asked in a teasing voice, and then, seeing that I was completely stunned, she continued, "I was watching you. Watched me. I saw you in the pub, and I saw that you liked to watch all those men thinking about me. It's amazing what a little makeup and a sexy outfit can do, isn't it? But I have very wide peripheral vision, dear. That's one of the many things you don't know about me." As she spoke, she took my hands, inviting me to stand up, kissed the tip of my nose lightly, and began unbuttoning my pants. I couldn't find my voice at all. I just looked at her beautiful body, the big, beautiful breasts that David and Tom were fondling and kissing, the firm, slim waist, and the strand of hair. "That's why I kept the guys waiting," she told me. "Why did it take you so long to come home? No, tell me later. I heard you come in. Don't worry, they didn't hear you. But I'm used to how quietly you walk through the door. And I knew when you were sneaking up the stairs. You saw everything. Everything. You know? I didn't even let them kiss me until I was sure you were there to see what was going on. If you had done, or said, anything to object, it would have been over. I would have stopped from that moment on." She paused briefly to unbutton and remove my shirt before continuing, but that would have been unfortunate, to say the least. Over the past few days, I've had my first chance to get to know myself, who I really am. My father practically locked me out of the house, and you thought I was just a useful wife and housekeeper. I suddenly realized that I could be so much more, that I could actually enjoy life. And I made the decision to do it either with you, which I'd rather do, or without you. She paused again, then gently pushed her utterly stunned husband back onto the bed and began removing the rest of my clothes. "I really wanted to see how it would be, love, but I didn't want to do anything behind your back. I just had a feeling you'd like it. And I was right, wasn't I?" Great. She was right in every way. I enjoyed watching her with two men, and I was attracted to her again. Anyway, I knew you'd be there. It's the perfect place, isn't it? And the fact that you're almost certainly watching us turned me on even more. As she slowly approached me, I soon discovered that her description was accurate, and the only thing missing from it was the incredible heat I felt from her. Next, my wife said to me, "If we want to have a lifestyle as exciting as the one we have today, we're going to have to get out of here. It's too restrictive here. Everyone knows everything about everyone else. What do you think?" "Yes, we could do that," I sighed. "We could sell this house and buy somewhere smaller, somewhere close to the city. Anywhere, as long as it was a private house. And we'd still have a very good income. Someplace where I could bring another man sometimes?" she asked. and when I nodded vigorously, continued. We could arrange things so that you could watch without risking being caught. You could watch me enjoy other men. Would you like that? Because I really want you to watch me, she said, her breathing becoming very heavy. Oh, yes, Anna, I said. And then I'm going to come and make love to you. And then we made love, and it was wonderful. Is that what you want? Are you sure, love? She asked, and I barely had time to answer. Yes, I really want this, Anna. Before I was rewarded with her glow of pleasure and a gorgeous smile. The end! Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.